Hey everyone, welcome to the Mass Construction Show with today's guest, Nelson Miller, Building Commissioner in the City of Malden. I'm your host, Joe Kelly, and this is a podcast about all things construction in Massachusetts and beyond. Today, Nelson and I discuss the all too frequent parapet collapse. We discuss what causes it, what the code has to say about it, and what you can do in your community to prevent this from happening with or without money. Today's show is brought to you by Central, commercial carpenters and supporters of our conversation. Enjoy the show. Hey Nelson, welcome to the Mass Construction Show.
Thanks for having me.
So I've been getting a lot of building officials these days, between Rick, you, Mike, who else? But, and I want to keep that. I actually spoke to Jake Nunemacher about having him come on because there's an interesting one about flushing sprinkler systems prior to turnover. And I had one super call me and say, hey, have you ever heard of this? He's like, I just got hung up. And then he sent me over a screenshot and I saw it was from a presentation that Jake gave. And I'm like, oh, geez, I didn't even know about that. You know, when they're flushing the system, they're finding all rocks and all this crap in it. Right. So I like this. And we've been talking a lot about with like building official type stuff on the rundown we do on Instagram. So there's been a lot of discussion about how building departments and fire departments can get better. You and I have kind of talked, we have on the side about AI and third parties. Like there's so much going on. And I almost wonder if there's a good show to be had to bring on like-minded, but maybe even somebody with a different opinion, but people that realize that inspectional service departments, fire departments need to change the way they operate. So, maybe that's a group one sometime.
I think it's important. You and I have talked about it, that inspectional service departments, contractors, fire departments, they're all on the same team with a lot of this stuff. And I think there's a lot of building officials out there who want to be in a team atmosphere with the property owners and the construction companies, and just need to find a way to do it. So that could be very useful.
Yeah. And then on the flip side, there's clearly the people that don't want to. And I think it goes to, are you the authority and do you do enforcement, or, are we a public servant that are here to help the process?
Right. And we administration.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's those two camps. And I think it's time for we're public servants and we play a role in the economy as well, right? We need that to grow. We need for a whole host of reasons. And I think it's just the right thing to do, right? Do we really want to be obstructionists and people that are going around just trying to slow down the process and, flex our muscles? I don't think that's what we really want to do, but that's not why we're here today. But I think you fall into that camp. So I was kind of just tossing it out there of, I thought almost like a round table where a bunch of people that are willing to think different about building departments and fire departments. It would be fun to get them in a room and put that discussion out there. I think the episode with Rick Wood is a must listen for every building department.
Yeah, I just told you, I watched it last night, and I thought it was great. I've known Rick for a long time. He certainly has a unique perspective that a lot of people don't have. It's certainly one that I share, and I think that'd be a great idea to get a group of people like that together in the same room and see what comes out of their brains.
Yeah, and he, especially when he's pretty bold about, why do we even need codes? Right? He even goes farther than me. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't know about that.
Yeah. So it's interesting, but those are the kind of people you need to get things changed, right? So maybe we'll go.
Yeah, sometimes you have to have those extreme conversations to get back to, somewhere in the middle of it. Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. But we're here today because of Parapet Collapses. Exciting topic, right? Most people don't do this, but maybe you just see it out occasionally. But if you were to go ahead and Google Parapet Collapse, you'd be shocked at the frequency with which it happens. It happened to me when I was a building official in my ward, a pretty severe one. it happened to you in your community. It happened to Mike when he was in Brookline. So there's been multiple in Boston that I know of. You had the one in Malden. I believe there's been multiple in Brookline. It doesn't really, unless you go look for it, you probably wouldn't know it. And the other thing that's tricky is the way people report on it. I don't think the average reporter knows what a parapet is. So a lot of times it'll fall under building collapse or brick falls from, and they get kind of confused about what it is. So it's a little hard to search for. But if you dig, it is surprising how frequent a parapet collapses. And I'm not sure about the injuries. That would be something interesting to look for, but it's definitely an issue. You had a collapse in your community. What's kind of the state of affairs when it comes to parapets? Is it as serious as I'm making it out to be, or is it hard to know? Like, what would you say?
I think it is as serious as you're making it sound. And I think that for a lot of reasons you just said, there's not a lot of awareness because it's not that exciting. Most people outside of construction and a lot of people inside construction have no idea what a parapet is or which portion of the building a parapet is. And it's unless somebody gets hurt, you're probably not going to hear about it. I know that one that sticks out in my mind was not a very severe collapse, but it took place in Medford, a community next to Malden. And it was reported on because someone was under it and got hurt. So it does happen a lot more often than you think. And if you're out there looking at these things regularly, like my staff and I are doing, you see how close a lot of them are to the point of, some sort of failure or collapse.
Yeah, and actually it might be a good place to start because you bring up a good point about, does someone even know what a parapet is? What is a parapet?
So parapet is pretty much by definition, it's the top part of a firewall. So if you're looking at a building, it is generally, you'll see them at the front of the building. Sometimes you'll see them on all four sides or three sides. And it's the portion of that, let's say the front facade or the front wall that sticks up above the roof. And in older buildings, they're usually extremely decorative.
Yeah, really ornate.
Yeah, they can have ornate sort of stonework or masonry work or capstones or things like that. In today's construction, they're not usually that exciting.
No.
You wouldn't even notice that they're there. They just kind of blend into the rest of the facade of the building. So
it's a whole podcast.
Yeah.
Ugly architecture.
Yeah, ugly architecture. Right. But they are generally ornate. But the more important thing, and the reason we're talking about this is because they do stick up above the building. So they're pretty much supporting themselves.
Yeah, I guess in the way that a cantilever is a little more challenging than something that has posts on it. A parapet wall, same thing, right? You're just freestanding going up rather than out, and you often don't see kickers coming off of it, or
rarely. And it's an outside element of a building, no different than, let's say, the front facade, but it's exposed on three sides: the front, the back, and the top. Unlike a lot of other parts of your building, the facade of a building, you're only seeing the outside of it. The inside of it's on the inside of the building. So it's exposed in multiple areas.
Yeah, and it's a unique thing because it was used for so many reasons, right? Like you were saying, sometimes it's firewall extension. Sometimes it is purely decorative. Other times, more in modern times, it's, instead of having safety rails, let's have, there's lots of reasons. Sometimes it's to screen a piece of equipment.
Right.
There's all these reasons that you end up with parapet walls, and it seems like a very uninteresting part of the building other than the old ones that were, beautiful. But it's kind of like the forgotten portion, but because of that, who's looking at it?
Right. And when you say forgotten, most people, I would say, especially if you're not a building inspector, when you walk down the street, you're not looking up. People aren't just paying attention to these things. And if you own a building, you're probably not going up on your roof all the time and taking a look at it. So they very rarely get looked at.
Yeah. And when you're saying they're supported just by themselves in many cases, explain that a little bit to folks.
Sure. So the older style parapets, not so much modern buildings, because modern buildings, your facade of your building could be, the parapet could be an extension of the wall coming up. But in older buildings, which is where we're seeing these issues, the parapet is generally masonry. It's generally what's called widths of brick, which is multiple layers of bricks, which can be tied to each other or maybe aren't. And they're extending up above the roof line without any sort of support behind it whatsoever. So the only thing that's really holding this thing together is the bricks, the gravity, and the mortar between them.
That is probably 100 years old.
100 years old.
And crumbling.
Yeah, and as I said, they're exposed. They don't necessarily have any kind of cap on top of them. They could. Sometimes they have very beautiful caps. Sometimes they have very big and heavy caps, which is another problem.
Yep.
But either way, the masonry and the mortar is exposed all the time.
Yeah, the other interesting piece with that is an exterior of the building, you have one surface that's exposed, and you can do things to shed water away from that. But this is getting exposure on both sides. And you've got a joint where it marries the roof, and there's water getting in there. There's lots of places water can get inside. So it's uniquely more exposed. It's uniquely weaker because at least the exterior wall in an unreinforced building has the floor butting into it, giving you some lateral support. So this has no lateral support. It's exposed on all sides, and no one's ever looking at it.
Right. And a lot of them, particularly the one that failed in the city that I work in, had no protection on the top. And that's really a problem because now you have a flat surface at the top where water, snow, ice is allowed to collect, melt, freeze.
Can you explain that? What was the top of it?
So this building had, it was constructed in 1921, and it had a parapet, 3-width brick parapet, and mounted to the face of the parapet wall was this very beautiful, ornate cornice-style built-up molding that was constructed of wood and tin and the type of materials you'd expect to see in 1921.
Yep.
So the cornice was actually tied back with wood to the face of the parapet, which means it was hanging off of it, which was interesting. And because you couldn't...
And that was a bent metal?
It was a combination of wood and bent metal. Yeah. It had the crown molding sort of profile of the cornice was made of a tin and lead that was bent but attached to a wood structure behind it.
Yep.
So because you couldn't really see the top of that parapet, there was nothing on the top of it to wrap it up, to enclose it, to trim it out or make it look attractive. You couldn't see it.
Was it just exposed brick?
It was just exposed brick.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah. It had some smaller stones along the top of it, but didn't necessarily cover the entire top of it.
And for people that are listening on other platforms and not watching on Spotify, I'm going to drop in the video. It'll probably have already played by now because I'm planning on playing it while you're describing parapets. It's interesting, and you're lucky, I guess, in one sense, that you were able to capture some security footage from next door. So folks, if you want to watch it kind of live happen, and it was interesting how you didn't see a gradual leaning. It was almost like it was just let go instantly, and it was just like
it went all at once. Absolutely. And I think part of that could be contributed to the fact of that huge wood and metal structure that was hanging off the front of it. When a portion of that wall failed, that structure hanging off the front of it just pulled the rest of the wall down with it as fast as you could possibly imagine.
Yeah. Obviously I didn't watch the Huntington Ave parapet collapse, but it was in my ward, so I was out there after the fact. It was, for folks that don't know, Huntington Ave is quite a busy street. It's a college area. It was near a Green Line stop, which is like a subway stop for folks outside of Massachusetts. It was 10 a.m. How no one was there is nothing short of a miracle. How somebody didn't die there. Same thing in an ornate cornice was associated with the parapet, but it was the equivalent of, essentially, think of like a Jersey barrier upside down.
Oh,
That's how big it was, because it had the stones that got progressively wider as it went up, so it had that detail where it, like, cantilevered out.
yeah.
And it was massive. And same thing, the whole elevation came down. And I think once it started in the corner, and then think about the weight of one Jersey barrier, and it's attached to the thing next to it, and it just peeled away. And there was so much rubble because it was so large that they ended up bringing in cadaver dogs as it moved along, because there was so much rubble they couldn't tell if somebody was buried underneath.
Wow.
So it wasn't even like you could walk up and kind of look, and obviously nothing's under there because you could see, but it was that much rubble that you could not just walk up and know that nothing was under there. And it actually made a divot, like a depression in the sidewalk.
Wow.
From the force of the weight and the speed, because I think it was 4 stories up, and it was extremely heavy. But what was interesting, it was being held back by stone ballast, because the flashing was it's close to this. It was a long time ago, and I don't remember for sure, but I believe there was flashing from the roof going up onto the back of the parapet. There was stone ballast, and that stone was acting like a counterweight, holding it in place. And when they went to take the roofing off, it pulled all that stone ballast back. You didn't have the counterweight there, and it just fell forward. And you looked, the ties for it was like tie wire.
Yeah.
Just in the brick. That was it, and it was gone.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point about a lot of these. You see a lot of them that are constructed in that corbelled style, where the like the upside down staircase.
Yep.
And all that is doing is basically providing a load that's leaning out away from the building and
making it more top heavy too.
Making it more top heavy. And what you also see a lot of is buildings that have had modern roofs placed on them, and oftentimes what a roofing company will do if they're putting down, let's say, a rubber or a PVC roofing material, they'll wrap that material up the backside of a parapet and onto the top, which isn't necessarily a terrible thing because you're stopping that water intrusion through the back or through the top.
Yeah.
But now you also can't see it.
Yes.
So you can't see what type of damage is beneath that roofing. So it makes it difficult to inspect it, which is something we ran into in the city when we started to look at these.
Now, are all parapets created equal when it comes to the exposure?
I don't know if they're all created equal. I think that there's a lot of them that I've seen in our city, which is an old city and has an old building stock, like a lot of New England.
Yep.
And I think the ones that are made of masonry units, brick, those are really the ones that you see in the worst condition.
Yeah, that's what I'm really getting at. Like, so if you've got a framed metal stud with ephes on it, it's not really.
Yeah, that's not
right.
That's not going anywhere, and that's a good example of a parapet that's integrated into the structure of the front of the building, as opposed to stacked bricks, which is all we're talking about.
Yeah.
But there are older style parapets that are constructed in what look to be like larger poured chunks of concrete. So there's no joints, there's no masonry involved, and those tend to be in relatively good condition because all you're really looking at there is the degradation of the concrete itself. And those that can be repaired pretty easily. You don't generally see a complete and total failure of that. So I would say the ones that are made of brick, are really the ones that you get to be aware of.
Yeah. So we have kind of a unique issue in the Northeast, right? Which is we have that older housing stock. So, I mean, older building stock, right? So I guess where should people be raising flags? Cities that are older, right? Cities that are using masonry, but we're even kind of more unique up in the Northeast with the weather type stuff, right?
Yeah, the weather is the worst thing, for this type of construction. And these types of buildings, for the most part that we're talking about, are buildings that were constructed of masonry on the outside, wood frame on the inside. So the masonry exterior of these buildings are, they take a beating. Our weather in New England is not very friendly at all to buildings of any kind. But when you're talking about masonry and mortar, it's really, it's doing everything it can to tear these buildings apart. On top of that, when a lot of these buildings were built, there were no codes or necessarily construction standards. There was a lot of good craftsmanship, which is probably the reason they've lasted 100 years
1,000%,
without going anywhere. But that also leads to a certain amount of a great variation in the way a lot of them are put together. So you can't necessarily look at one and say, oh, the building next door was built just like that.
Right.
Because it may not have been. Yeah. I guess that's even true today. But
yes.
So, those factors of the materials, the type of construction, and our weather are really working against these buildings.
And the age.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we kind of have the perfect stew in the Northeast, right? And I'm sure there's other maybe, are there older cities in the Northwest that, that might have similar issues? Yeah, but I think that we have a high density of those type of buildings. And I remember sitting in, FEMA came, I went to Ashburton Place when I was a building inspector, and they gave like an emergency response training. And I remember the gentleman saying, if there is ever an earthquake in Boston,
a significant earthquake,
it will be so catastrophic just because of the building stock. He goes, the amount of unreinforced masonry that we have in the city it would be devastating, absolutely devastating. Because if you think about it, like it's just it's the weight of the brick itself, and then maybe the floor. But if you have any left to right swinging back and forth,
it's over.
It's over,
right? And not to mention, a lot of those buildings sit on places that used to have boats in them.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
I'm sure that doesn't help either.
Yeah, for folks outside of Massachusetts, like a lot of Boston is infilled harbor, right?
Ocean,
yeah. Hills that got knocked down, and it's what's wild is when it's funny. There's actually a term, urban fill. So when you're excavating, they'll say, okay, you've got sands, clays, silts, urban fill.
Urban fill. Right.
It was just buildings that they'd knocked down and just fill. And so I've done buildings where we're excavating, and what was the fill? What was the soils? It was urban fill.
Urban fill.
Yeah. And it was just crumbled up buildings that they pushed into the ocean.
Yeah. Yeah, that certainly doesn't help. That's for sure.
Yeah. So what is you're a building official, right? And what does the code say about this? Because if it's an issue, it should be being addressed, presumably, right? What does the code have to say about these structures? What should we be doing?
So there's really two places within our codes that would be a point in time that these would get assessed and addressed. The existing building code, which is to a lot of people a little bit of a mystery.
Foreign, yep.
Yeah. But the existing building code is a code book that the state of Massachusetts utilizes for the purpose of sort of deciding and giving you a pathway through, if you're going to do some work to a building, what else do you have to do to comply with the base codes? So the existing building code does address parapets in the way of roofing activities. If you read the sections, they're a little confusing.
Yep.
But they do require the evaluation of parapets at the point when you're replacing roofing on a building. So they're not saying you have to repair or replace or tear down a parapet, but you at least have to have it looked at and figured out if repairs need to be made or if it's going to fall down or
You need to do an assessment of it.
do an assessment. Right. So that's one place that they get addressed, and I'm not sure, honestly, how often that happens.
Yeah, not often.
Probably not.
Yeah.
Probably not. For a lot of reasons. Roofing activities are usually very quick, and companies get in and out.
And maybe they pull a permit, maybe they don't.
Maybe they pull a permit, maybe they do on a Saturday. And
frankly, does the building official go do a final inspection on it after even?
Right. Another good question. Yeah. Is everyone being looked at?
Yeah. And did they know that there's a parapet on it? You're replacing a rubber roof on that building out there. Oh, okay, well, not really much to look at, right?
Exactly.
And then no one ever sees it.
Yeah. There's not. It happens quickly enough that it's not practical for a building inspector to go out there before it gets taken off, while it's taken off, to look at what's under it, and then when it's all done to see how it was done.
It would be, sorry to interrupt, but it would be interesting. Like, would it make sense to, I'm thinking about it live here as we go, but should there be a checkbox on a roofing permit that says, does this building have a parapet? Yes or no? Just to at least get it on people's radar. And then maybe even building officials that don't know about this section, because I guarantee there's a lot of folks that don't. Maybe they'd be like, well, why are they asking about that? Right? At least just to get some awareness, even if there's no...
No, that's a great point. It really is a good question. And yeah, there probably should be some additional information provided for a roofing permit, which is ironic because most people look at a roofing permit as probably one of the easiest permits that you'd ever apply for or receive. Yeah. But, again, thinking about this as you're saying, it would make a lot of sense to do that and make the person reviewing that permit application, as well as the contractor and the building owner, aware that that's something that had to be looked at prior to putting this roof on.
Yeah. And then if you don't mind, do you mind if I talk a little bit about the new ones here in Massachusetts? No. So, as Nelson was saying, in the existing building code, it has thresholds. If you replace more than a certain percentage of the roof, it's 25% in one area. I think it might be 50 in another, depending on what section you're in. That if you are replacing more than that, you need to do the analysis of the parapet. And then depending on, what zone you're in, or what seismic category you're in, or what's the wind ones, where Cape is really high. I think they've got a risk category. They have seismic design zone. So depending on the category, you might have to do a different type of evaluation or no evaluation at all. So, but there's a 25 and 50% threshold depending on where you're looking. But Massachusetts went ahead and amended this and basically said you only have to do it if you're replacing the entire roof, which I think is unfortunate. The only thing that does is open the door to people that want to avoid doing an assessment. And they'll say, okay, well, we'll do this thing in two halves, right? I'll pull one permit, do 50%, go back another time, do the other 50%, and then I don't need to do this assessment. I don't need to address the parapet. Very weird amendment to me. I don't know.
Yeah, it is strange. And there's a few things that are strange about it. The base code itself is a little strange because I'm not sure how often 25% or 50% of a roof gets replaced.
Okay.
That doesn't happen very frequently. And, maybe we're talking about situations where you have multiple roof levels and they're not touching each other or something like that. But it seems weird that there would be a percentage of a roof. And then, as you said, Massachusetts making that less restrictive by say, well, no, it has to be 100%. Going back to something you brought up with the application, I think the awareness really needs to be made with the building officials also, because although the existing building code says 100%, when a building inspector is up on a roof looking at a roof, they have all the ability and authority in the world to look around and put their eyes on a parapet and say, hey, that doesn't look good. Get somebody to take a look at that and give me an evaluation of it. So, there going back to the partnership between contractors and building officials and property owners, there's a little bit probably shared responsibility amongst all of them to be aware of the fact that these things can and are an issue and should be looked at whatever opportunity you have to look at.
Yeah, so a unique one for Massachusetts, usually every time they're making it more restrictive for whatever reason. And this is a weird one. Like I'm about to say we were talking about it before, but Nelson and I were talking about it before we started recording. But, I want to deregulate everything, but this is like a weird one. Like I'm like, oh, let's make things less restrictive. But I think there's plenty of other better places where we could make things less restrictive for folks. This is a weird one where, you're dealing with a life safety issue, and the only reason to do that is to allow people not to have to do an analysis, and there's no look back on it. So it's not like if you do 50 and then another 50, you've done 100. Okay, well, you should do the assessment now. It's like, nope, you just did 50 and 50. No need to look at the assessment, right?
Yeah, and I think that, the hesitation, at least on my part, is the fact that these are pretty unique things. So there might not be a lot of opportunities to take a look at them. This is part of the reason that they, suddenly and catastrophically fail. It's because no one looked at it. It's not like they look great and all of a sudden fall apart. If you look at a parapet that's, been deteriorated over years, they show signs.
Yes.
So it is a unique thing to a building. And
many of them show signs. There's some of them that
some of them don't, or it's concealed.
Yeah.
But for the most part, you could look at it and get a feeling that, well, we should investigate this thing a little bit further and find out if it's fine.
What about the facade inspection requirement? Is that the other place where you think you could get picked up?
The other place I was thinking was really through the 110 inspection, certificate of inspection programs, which is a whole nother ball of wax when it comes to building officials and the ability to effectively have those types of inspections on all the buildings in their city. But a 110 inspection, a certificate of inspection, we call them 110 inspections because they come from section 110 of the code. That is a general overview of the building in its entirety. Life safety, egress, alarm, sprinkler, and structural components. So you do a 110 inspection on a building that has a parapet, it would make a lot of sense to say to the owner, I'd like you to get an engineer to take a look at that and tell me what kind of shape it's in. And does it have to be pointed? Does it have to be torn down? Whatever.
Yeah.
So it's, those 110 inspections.
That's funny. I wouldn't have thought. I always just in my head think of those more as like egress and emergency lights and, the life safety systems. But yeah, I guess
one of the great things and terrible things about section 110 of the building code is that it doesn't give you any specificity as to what you're supposed to look at.
Yeah.
So, in my opinion, and I think in a lot of building officials' opinions, it's an opportunity to view a building. And buildings are all unique. So you may not have the same checklist for every single building you look at, filled out.
Yep.
But, you could certainly go to a building like this one that I had in the city and look up, go out on the roof, see that it's a parapet, and order a review of it by a registered design professional.
Yeah. And for people that don't know, I mean, Nelson mentioned it a little bit, but it's in Massachusetts, in our amendments, we have it's based off of the use, will determine, if it's a restaurant, an assembly, a school, it'll tell you the frequency with which you're supposed to do an inspection as a building official. So it's, you head out and you have to annually, a lot of times they'll give the building a certificate, say, yep, we looked at this, here's your annual 110 inspection or certificate of inspection, whatever it gets called, and they hang that thing on the wall. A lot of towns have little gold seals on them or whatever. Right. Yeah, that's probably a good place to capture it. I would think the requirement for facade inspections is another one. But the problem is, are they looking at it as the parapet, or are they just looking at it from the ground, right?
Right. And a lot of these buildings do have roof accesses. They're flat roofs. They have, doghouse sort of staircase entries that go up to them. A lot of them don't. So a facade inspection, you would actually have to get someone up there on top of the roof to really look at it from all angles and see what kind of shape it's in. But I think you're right. A facade inspection would certainly, and you wouldn't stop once you got to the bottom of the parapet wall and say, okay, I'm done looking at the facade.
Right, you should be looking.
I'm done, right?
Yeah.
No, that would definitely be a part of it. Yeah.
So do you think I think we've kind of answered already, but do you think from a code perspective it's sufficient?
I think it's sufficient. I don't know if it's necessarily practically put into use. Again, I can really only speak to my city, and I can tell you that, there's a extraordinary number of buildings, as we found out through an analysis, that are of this vintage, of this type of construction, that have some form of parapet wall to it. So, is waiting or relying on a roofing permit the best way to do that? I don't know. Maybe not. It's certainly an opportunity, but someone can put a rubber roof on a building and it lasts 25 years. So I'm not sure that's the most effective way to do it. Yeah. It's just a way to do it.
So you think the code is sufficient, but the execution it isn't?
I think that building officials need to take advantage of those three ways to inspect them and use whichever one is most suitable for the condition of the building at that time.
Yep.
So a building has no indication of having a new roof put on it, and you're driving down the street and you're looking up and you can see some sort of damage. That's the time to order a 110 inspection for that building, and particularly get some kind of registered design professional eyes on that thing.
Yeah. I think that's often the case, right? When people are talking about new amendments or even just general laws, and they're like, "Oh, listen, we don't need another regulation. Enforce the ones that are there. Use the tools that are there." And I think often we try and just add stuff on, "Oh, well, we need this now. We're going to have another affidavit added to the no, we don't need another affidavit. We need to use the tools we have and hold building owners, they should be, hold them responsible for doing general maintenance and upkeep that's required of a building, right?"
Yeah, there's education and there's awareness, and ultimately it's the building owner's responsibility to get this stuff done, which is great if you're a building official, right?
Yep.
Because, this is your responsibility, which is probably the last thing people want to hear. But you can't expect someone, just because they own a building, to have any kind of awareness of what a parapet is, or what could possibly happen to it, or what happens if it fails, and what
I would have no idea.
Yeah, it is. And there's many parts of buildings that we deal with that property owners have no idea anything about, but they're expected to keep them in serviceable condition. So I think it comes down to awareness on the building officials' end to make property owners aware, and then let the property owners carry through with whatever they need to do to make those buildings safe.
Yeah, because you're right. I mean, it's not fair, right? So much of it, think about everything. Think about you're a licensed builder. It's in the code. You're supposed to know about it. Well, okay. Well, that changed, and how am I? Do I go home at night and I read the code? That's
right.
That's unrealistic to expect that of people. I'm a business owner. How many business owners are, in what's the word? Are failing to comply with some version of the tax code? Everybody probably has 100 violations of the tax code, because who knows what all that stuff is in there. And a building owner has the same thing with the building code. How are they going to know about if some building officials don't even know? How is some building owner supposed to know that if they replace a certain percentage of their roof, they're supposed to do an assessment on the parapet.
Right. And
Unreasonable.
To your point, there's so many layers of regulation. There's so many codes. I mean, let's be real.
Yeah.
Our Massachusetts State Building Code is comprised of thousands of pages, right? So being able to decipher the parts of a building that are truly life safety issues, top of the list type of stuff, triage when you're looking at a building. That's really the guidance that a building official, an architect, an engineer, that they can provide to a property owner. I think the property owners need to be aware that they need to seek that advice. So, waiting for a roofing permit might not be the best way to do that. It's certainly a time.
Helps.
It's certainly an opportunity. Yeah.
All right. So you had a pretty major parapet collapse in Malden, and you're here not only because you were lucky to have a parapet collapse, but
also lucky.
It was interesting. The city of Malden went ahead and said, we are going to put dollars out there and pay to have an assessment of the city and all of the parapets throughout the city. It was impressive to me. You have kind of a narrative portion about what the conditions of things are. You had a nice little thing that's more of an Excel spreadsheet looking thing, and they graded. It has the address, it has type of construction, number of stories, square footage, when it was built, and then they graded it. And I'm not sure, they had grade and condition. What was condition versus grade, FA versus FR?
So that's actually information from our assessors department, from their assessors records, based off of the grade and condition of the last assessment, which is it's a interesting part of the story also, and it would probably be interesting to people out there in the municipal world about some of the collaboration between departments in my city to get this whole thing taken care of.
Yeah, that's what I want to know, because I'm sitting there going, where do you even begin?
Yeah. Well, I asked the same question.
Yeah. So you went and hired an outside agency.
Yeah. So we had this collapse.
Or maybe even walk from the beginning. So the collapse about, what did I'm presuming as a city council, did they vote to allocate dollars?
Yeah, sure.
Walk us through what happened.
So to back up a little bit further than that, it was a Saturday afternoon. I had been called by the fire department for a fire at one of our housing authority buildings. Small fire, wasn't a big deal. And that was all kind of cleared up. And I was standing there having a conversation with the deputy chief about, I don't know, the Red Sox or something.
Yeah.
Just sort of talking. And all of a sudden, he's got the radio up here, and the radio fire alarm calls in and says, Deputy Chief, do you still have the building commissioner with you? And he said, yeah, he's standing right here. And they said, well, we need him to go over to Salem Street for a building collapse.
I was going to say, did they call it a building collapse?
Building
That's
collapse.
what everybody does, yeah.
And I went, the one thing you don't want to hear is a building collapse. And so, my heart goes up into my throat. I said, I got to go. So when I drove over there, it was shocking. It was catastrophic. I'm sure people have seen the video now. And the incredible part was that no one got hurt.
Yeah.
It is a busy corner. It's a residential building. It's next to, it has a bus stop in front of it. And not a single person was standing there when this collapsed. If they were, they'd be dead.
Yeah.
So getting past all that, obviously the immediate concern was the building itself and a building collapse. Is this sort of confined to just the parapet? So working with the property owner, they got an engineer in to do an evaluation of that building, and come to find out it was just the parapet. The rest of the building was fine. So now the next question was, now what? How many other buildings are there that are in the same sort of condition? So had some conversations with the mayor, who's my boss, and he wanted to know what we were going to do about it. And I said, well, we're going to have to do an evaluation of these types of buildings throughout the city. And he said, well, are you going to do that? And I said, no, we're going to have to get some engineers in, to look at these. And he's, that's going to cost some money. without hesitation, he said, you figure out how to do it and we'll get you the money. So that's
impressive.
That's not something you generally, would find in municipalities, not because mayors don't want to protect their buildings, but because it's not always that easy to just free up, the type of money we're talking about. So he immediately he committed $75,000 to doing this and asked that I go to city council and explain to them, because obviously city council's involved in approving funding. So I went to city council, explained what happened, and explained what the process was going to be. And basically what we did was we needed to narrow it down, because 12,500 properties in the city of Malden.
Just can't send the people out there roaming around trying to find cars.
Drive down the street and tell me where the bad ones are. Yeah. So that wasn't going to work. So I said, well, how can I sort of come up with a list without literally driving around the city? And speaking to our assessor, I asked him, how flexible is your assessing software? And he said, well, it's very flexible in that he can set parameters so that he can search through his data based off of particular items, like year the building was constructed, condition.
Do they have like material, like brick versus wood, or?
They do, and they have number of stories. So I gave him a list, and I said, well, give me every building in the city that is of this certain vintage, of this type of material, in a middle or poor condition. I gave him probably 6 or 7 criteria to produce a list, and he gave it to me in about 10 minutes.
Oh, beautiful! And
it was a list. It was a list of 53 buildings, and
that's actually not that many.
It's not. It was actually a pleasant surprise. So 53 buildings, which I then went through all of them just to confirm that the data that he had searched was, these buildings were actually fell under that criteria, and they all did. So we engaged an engineering firm, and step 1 was take this list of 53 and do visual inspections of all the buildings. Nothing invasive, not climbing up on roofs, literally driving down the street, getting out, looking up, walking around the building. All the property owners were notified that they have a person walking around their property, and tell me which ones you feel need further investigation. So, and then they did that. Probably took them, I would say, maybe a week or 2 to get all those inspections done, and then came back with a report. That report reported on all 53, but then narrowed it down to 13 that they said, these we need to really look into.
And those are the ones that have like the pictures associated
those are
with the report.
Right. Yeah. So they would provide a picture, and
this is public?
Oh, it's all public. Yep.
So can I share this as part of the
podcast, absolutely.
Report if people want to look at it?
Yeah, absolutely. So they narrowed it down to 13 properties, and my office coordinated with the property owners, because now we have to get inside on top. Some needed man lifts. So we coordinated with the property owners. That was probably the hardest part, was just coordinating with the property owners so that the inspections were done on certain days at certain times, because that's when this engineering firm was going to have people in the city to do it. They did all 13. Probably took them, I would say, maybe a few weeks, because now they would spend maybe 4, 5, 6 hours, on a building. And the result of that turned into a list of measures that each building needed to take. It also surprisingly resulted in the necessity to tear 2 buildings down.
Yeah, which is
crazy.
Yeah. And now, can I ask a little bit about that? So it's surprising still that I was thinking that you were going to say, we got and we flagged these particular buildings, and then you went to the owners and said, you need to hire somebody to look at you guys.
No.
As the city paid for that full review and investigation,
yes,
by an engineer of everything.
Yeah.
And then once that engineer gave recommendations to the property owner, was there pushback from the property owner? Did any of them want to say, well, we're going to have our own engineer look at it? Like, what was the...
No, there wasn't any pushback. Even the two that had to come down, there was surprisingly zero pushback. The report, the way we handled the reporting from the engineering firm, with the city as the client,
Right.
all the recommendations came to us. They didn't send their recommendations to the actual property owners.
Okay.
I turned those recommendations, I incorporated those recommendations into a letter from my office saying, your building has been inspected by a registered design professional. They've encountered these issues. Here's a suggested remediation for those issues. You have this amount of time to get it done. Fix it.
So you didn't write a violation?
Nope. They weren't violation letters. There was always, of course, the risk of violation if they didn't comply with the order to fix the building.
Yeah.
But it was more of a providing them that report of what the issues were and what the suggested ways were to fix them.
Mm.
They were provided the opportunity to have their contractor or their engineer say to us back, well, we're going to fix it this way, not that way. So we weren't telling them how they had to fix it. We told them they had to fix it.
Or what? Yeah.
Most of them did it the way they were told to do it, because why not?
Yep.
Right? You're given this free
Engineering.
report and free engineering.
Yep.
I can think of one building where their engineer had some different ways to do it, which were perfectly acceptable, and they all got done.
That's wild. Do you think that you got everything?
No, I don't think the world we live in is one where you get everything.
Yeah, I wouldn't think so. I mean, it's not. You can do your best, right? Like,
well, you can do your best, and sometimes these issues aren't totally visible. Sometimes they're not obvious.
Well, forgive me. Let me. I was saying, do you think you captured every property that had a parapet wall?
Probably not.
Yeah.
Probably not. I think that would be
with what you had to work with. You probably did a damn good job, but like,
yeah,
there's no.
I think we did pretty good. Now, that being said, in every city and town is constituted differently, right? The way your buildings are laid out, the mix. Malden is a place that has some very large residential areas, strictly residential areas, but Malden's an old place, and some of those residential areas have some buildings that I'm sure 80 years ago was where people in the neighborhood went to buy meat. Like every city and town around Boston has those types of places.
Yep.
And sometimes those buildings get classified maybe differently than what we were looking for in our report. So there's some of those that maybe got missed, probably. The downtown areas in the main thoroughfares leading to the downtown area, I think we captured all. I think we got all those. Yeah, because those are obvious and they're very easy to pick out.
Yeah. Now, what would you say to a building official in the community, or the city council or some town manager or whatever that is saying, hey, this is something we would like to do? How can I phrase this nicely? That we don't have the political luxury of just having a collapse. So, like, there's a whole lot more willingness or public acceptance of spending dollars after something like that happens, right? People are willing to, oh, geez, that just happened. Yeah, whatever it takes, right?
Right.
What are some things that you think a town or a city could do if they don't have the dollars to hire someone out and do an evaluation? What are some steps they could take to try and...
I think if you're a city or a town that didn't have a catastrophic collapse like this, and there's lots of them, I don't think you would necessarily need to go to the length of what we did in providing funding and providing the engineering services to get these buildings evaluated. Ours was unfortunately a reaction to something.
Yep.
So if you're a municipality and you're not reacting, you're trying to be proactive about it. I think that having, maybe your inspectional services staff going through the same process that we went through, where you're working with, let's say, your assessor's office, and you're identifying these buildings, and then reaching out to these building owners to present them with a 110 inspection request or a facade inspection request, to make them aware of the issues that they might have. I think that's probably the best way to do it. And what we have done since as a city is there's a lot of grant funding out there, and there's a lot of programs out there where money can be provided to property owners for a variety of things for a building, not just lead, but lead, healthy homes, life safety issues. You can make those programs obvious and available to a property owner. So I've reached out to a property owner that owns, a building, let's say 25 residential units. And because of the people living in the building, that building qualifies to get some funding to pay for these types of things. So I think let's face it, it all comes down to dollars.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And frankly, I was shocked it would only cost $75,000.
Actually, it was under budget. We got done. We got done for 65.
Beautiful.
But if you can make like anything else, if you can make something not such a financial burden for a property owner. Property owners want their buildings to be safe. They don't want people to be unsafe. They don't want catastrophic issues. So if you can be a partner with them, making them aware of what's wrong with their building and in some way assisting them financially in getting that done through grant programs or whatever you might have access to, which most in towns do, I think that's probably the most effective way to do it.
Okay. All right. This was great. I really hope that this is an awareness type episode for folks, because it could be somebody within government that, hey, now it's on their radar. It could be a roofer. Hopefully, any roofer listening to this, maybe take a look, maybe raise your hand, mention it, maybe think about it when you're stripping the roof away from the parapet. Maybe doing it more carefully. Maybe you peel something back, take a look. Hey, does this thing look stable before I start taking a bar to this to, get or a scraper or whatever up to get the roof off? General contractor.
Yeah.
You're overseeing the project, and it includes renovations and stuff like that. A waterproofer. Any of these folks, if that's you, just be aware. Maybe the next time you're on a project, it's got a parapet, take a good look at it and say, we're going to be stripping the roof. Let's maybe have somebody take a look at the parapet. Maybe it's just the brickie or the waterproofer. Say, hey, can you go up there and tell me this thing looks solid, right? They're experts too.
Yeah.
You don't have to have a stamp to be an expert. So, I really hope if you're a building official, town manager, fire official, a GC, a roofer, a waterproofer, whatever you are, if you're part of the process, maybe help get the word out. If you're in real estate and, you want to talk about it in your circles, you're looking at buying a building, maybe take a look at the parapet. So I appreciate you taking the time to come out here and talk about this. I love what you guys did in Malden to put this program together, and thank you for educating people, and thank you for tidying up the city of Malden when it comes to parapets.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thanks, Alice.